Hi, everybody. Okay, so you just finished your warm up. Your warm up was several numbers that you were squaring. Squaring means that it has an exponent of 2. So if we look at 3 squared, or 3 to the power of 2, that means we have 3 times 3, and our answer is 9. Today we're going to work backwards from this. We're going to do the opposite of squaring, and the opposite of squaring is called square root. We use this symbol here to show that we are finding the square root. So it's called the square root or the radical sign. And it's asking what number times itself is going to give me the answer of 9. And the answer is not 9, the answer is 3. So what number times itself is going to give me 9? And we know that that's 3. So this is what we're doing today. And actually every number has a positive and negative root, because we know that -3 squared is also 9. So if we are trying to find the negative root, you're going to be asked like this. It's going to have the negative on the outside. And so this is saying, what is the negative of the square root of 9? So the square root of 9 is 3. And so that would be -3. Or what is the negative root of 9? So your notes have all this written down. They say that when we evaluate a square root, remember, evaluate means coming up with a number. It is the opposite of squaring the number. Squaring means multiplying a number by itself. So square root is what number is multiplied by itself to get that answer. Square roots are shown using the radical sign, also known as the square root symbol. So here are the two we just talked about. The square root of 9 is 3, because 3 times 3 is 9. The negative root of 9 is -3, because -3 times -3 is 9. Now, we've talked about this a little bit before in the past. There's no way for you to really do this on your own unless you have our square roots memorized. And if you do, that's great. You can use that. But you can always use your calculator. So if you take a look at this image here, I've shown you the button that you use for square root. So it's the button above the 7. We're going to try the first 2 on your worksheet. So the first one is the square root of 16. So what number times itself equals 16? I'm actually going to change screens here and show you the calculator. And so let's see, here we go. So if you are going to put it in your calculator, you turn your calculator on, square root button is here. So you're going to hit the square root button of 9 and then hit enter. And that will give you the answer, which is 3. All right, so let's go back to our sheet and we're going to type that in. So do a new share. There we go. So we would say that the square root of 16 is 4. Did I do the square root of 16? Oh boy, I did the square root of 9. Let's go back. I was a little bit distracted. So I have to do the square root of 16. So let me new share again. So the square root button, square root of 16 is 4. While I'm here, I'm actually going to do the other problem, the second problem. And if you look at the second problem, it is the opposite of the square root of 4. The opposite of the square root of 4. So you can either, if you know the opposite is going to be negative, you can do that. But you could also put the negative sign in, and then we hit our square root button and we put in our 4 and we hit enter, and the answer is -2. So let's go back and write that in. All right. So the opposite of the square root of 4 is -2. All right, so I'd like you to try like maybe 3 or 4. That's all I want you to try for right now. And then we're going to move on to the next page, which is cube roots, because we have 4 pages we need to go through. So I want to do a couple on each page. And then if you have time, you can go back and finish. So when you've done 1 or like 2 or 3 problems, I want you to move on to the next page and start the video again. Okay, so we need to understand square roots, but we also need to understand a cube root. A cube is when you have an exponent of a 3. So an exponent of 3. So 4 to the 3rd power is also called 4 cubed. That means we're doing 4 times 4 times 4, and that gives us an answer of 64. If we do the opposite of cubing, we're going to do the cube root instead of the square root. This is a radical sign. We put the 64 underneath, and to show that instead of the square root, we want the cube root, we actually put the number 3 here. This is called the index. We can actually find cube roots. We can find the root, the 4th root, the 5th root. This number can change. If you don't see a number, it always means square root. But when we cube root, we have to put a 3 in there. So this is asking, what's the cube root of 64? What number can multiply by itself 3 times to get 64? And the answer is 4. Now, mine does not have this, but on your worksheet, you can also find the cube root of negative numbers. So if I do the cube root of negative 64, that asks me what number times itself 3 times is going to give me an answer of negative 64. And so we know that if 4 times 4 times 4 is positive 64, negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4 gives me negative 64. So the cube root of negative 64 is negative 4. And your notes again explain this. It says evaluating a cube root is the opposite of cubing a number. Remember, cubing a number means using it as a factor multiplication 3 times. And cube roots are shown using this symbol. So we need to use a different button on our calculator in order to do cube root. This one you might not have memorized, and really your calculator is the only way to do it. So if we look here, you actually have to push the 2nd button, and then you push this little arrow up, which is your exponent button, because right up here is how you're going to put in the cube root. So I want us to do a few together. Let's take a look at the first one. So these are the first 2 on your packet. And so we're going to do them together. And I'm going to just show you using, I'm getting my packet. I'm going to show you using the calculator. Now the 8 on yours is a negative. So let me just make sure I put a negative in there. Okay, here we go. We have the cube root of 27 and the cube root of negative 8. So I'm going to switch on over to my calculator so that you can see that. Hold please. Here we go. Calculator. Okay, so here we go. The cube root. This one's a little bit different. We need to start by telling the calculator that it's going to be a cube root. So we need to put in our 3 first. Then we hit, remember, 2nd, and this button right here. You can see there's like a little root symbol up here, a square root with an X next to it. So if we do that, now we see that it says cube root, and then we're going to put in the number that's under the cube root sign. And we end up with 3. So the answer for the cube root of 27 is 3. That means 3 times 3 times 3 is going to give us 27. All right, the second one, and I'm not going to go back, but the second one is the cube root of negative 8. So we're going to hit again, we're going to go to cube. We need to tell the calculator it's going to be a 3 cube root. We're going to hit 2nd in this button here. And then we're going to put negative 8 and hit enter. And the answer is negative 2. All right, so just a reminder, you're going to put the 3 in first, hit 2nd, and this button right here. And then whatever number you're trying to cube, you'll put in underneath. Okay, let's go back. I'm going to fill in my answers, and then I'm going to have you guys practice a few times. So here we go. So the cube root of 27 was 3, and the cube root of -8 was -2. So I want you to try 2 or 3 till you feel comfortable with the calculator. Try those. Remember, don't finish the whole thing because we've got 2 more lessons to look at. When you feel ready, then I want you to pause the video, try 2 or 3, and then start again. All right. So now here's where we get into our algebra part. We need to be able to solve square roots and solve cube roots. So we are going to do a few problems together. And I would like to start with the first one on your paper. Your paper gives you directions, and I would love for you to look at those when you have a chance. But we're going to start with the first one. That's at the very top corner on the left. It is a squared equals 36. Again, you can go back and look up here if you need it. I'm going to just do 2 examples with you so that you can see. Now we are being asked to solve an equation. So we know how to do that. We draw a line down the middle. I need to figure out what A is. So when we solve equations, we do the opposite of what's happening. So it's a squared. The opposite is the square root of a squared. That cancels out my squared because it's the opposite. Opposite operations cancel each other out. But if I square root one side, I have to square root the other side. So now when you do you might put this in your calculator, right? And you end up with A equals 6. But here's where we need to be informed math students. And we need to remember that actually there's 2 roots. A could equal +6 or A could equal, that's right, -6. So the way we show that is with this plus or minus sign. Pretty good? So you do the opposite operation. If we look up here, x squared equals 9. They did the square root to get rid of the squared, square root of 9, and your answer was x equals ±3. Let's look at one more example. Now I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom of your page, in the bottom right-hand corner of that page that we're on. All right, and we have p squared equals 250. So we're going to do the same thing. We need to get rid of the squared. We're going to do the opposite by doing the square root. That cancels that out. But if I square root one side, I have to square root the other side. And now I'm going to switch back to my calculator because I want to show you what happens when I do the square root of 250. So let's go back to the calculator. All right, here we go. Now I'm going to do the square root of 250. And you see how I get this big number? Remember, we talked about it's irrational. You can't write a fraction. It goes on and on and on forever. Many of our square roots and cube roots are going to have that kind of answer. If they do, we have a very specific way to write our answer. So instead of writing that out, or instead of rounding our decimal, we're going to just leave our answer in what we call square root form or radical form. So we're going to say that p equals the square root of 250. We're just going to leave it like that because it's not a perfect square. And we just need to remember that it can always be a positive or negative. So I would like you to pause the video right now and try a couple more on this page. You might need to try a few more, maybe try 5, see if you get it. And then when you feel comfortable with it, I'd like you to come back. So pause the video, try a few. We have one more thing to look at, and then you can finish all your practice. Okay, so just like you can solve an equation with a square root, you can solve an equation with a cube root. All right, so let's look at this example here. We'll start with the example this time. The cube root of x equals -8. So we're going to try and find out, well, what does x equal then? So we're going to do cube root both sides, and the cube root of -8 gives me -2. So that would be my answer. So let's try two of these together. I think we will try, let's try the first one, which is b to the third equals 64. All right, we're solving this, so we have to undo the third, the exponent 3. The inverse or the opposite is to do the cube root. That will cancel out my 3's, right, if I do that. But if I do the cube root of one side, I have to do the cube root of the other side. What this does is it turns this side into just a b. And if I do the cube root of 64 in my calculator, that's right, I get a 4. Now, cubes are different than squares. Cubes only have one root. They only have one answer. So we're not going to write plus or minus on this one. It's just whatever the answer it is. All right, let's look at another example. So I'm going to the problem right next to this problem. So we have f to the third power equals 2. All right, so let's solve this. The way we're going to solve it, we see that it's a cubed variable. So to undo cubed, we have to do the opposite, which is cube root. That cancels out my 3's. If I cube root one side, I have to cube root the other side. And so now I end up with f equals, I'm going to go back to my calculator. So I want us to see this. And so remember, we do the 3 first, we do the second, and we come down here, and then 2, and I hit enter. And now I get a number again that goes on and on forever and never stops, right? Like this is an irrational number, can't be written as a fraction. So I'm going to leave my answer in cube root or radical form. So the final answer is just going to be the cube root of 2. So if your answer is a whole number, you put it as a whole number. If your answer is one of these long decimals, you leave it in what we call radical or cube root form. So now I want you to try a few of these. And then when you're done, I'd like you to go through and finish up the practice. If you'd start with the equations, that'd be great, because that's the more challenging work. And you do have an answer key to look at if you're struggling and you need a little bit of help. Okay, so I hope that it goes good, and we will go over this again on Monday.